I hold my business card in my hand. It feels heavy, substantial. It is not flimsy cardstock. It is made from brushed recycled metal, cool to the touch. The letters are etched deep into the surface, clean and precise. Amara Sinclair, 29 years old. Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Elite Aviation Solutions. I trace the logo with my thumb. It is solid. It is tangible. It is real. It is the physical proof of a life they told me was impossible. Because for the last 10 years in the pristine, judgment-filled halls of my childhood home, I have not been a CEO. I have been Amara the disappointment. I am the daughter who spectacularly failed her destiny. The one who looked at the prestigious, multi-generational legacy of Sinclair and Associates, the consulting firm my father built like a fortress, and chose to walk away. I am the cautionary tale they tell their friends about the daughter who wasted a 6-figure Ivy League education to chase a childish juvenile hobby involving airplanes. A hobby, as if it were collecting stamps. For 10 long grinding years, they have openly lamented my choices. They talked about their disappointment at country club dinners over cocktails with colleagues and in hushed, pitying tones to our extended family. They painted me as lost, confused, a poor, misguided child. And for those same 10 years while they were talking, I was working. I was building. I quietly, meticulously, and relentlessly built this company from nothing. I built it from a business plan, sketched on a legal pad at 2 a.m, fueled by my own small savings and an ocean of doubt. I built it into a multi-million-dollar private aviation service. Today, fate has a delicious, almost theatrical sense of humor. In a few moments, my parents Elias and Genevieve Sinclair will walk through those doors. They are escorting their biggest client. The client they have been courting for months, the one that represents the largest contract in their company's history. They are bringing him here to my facility to board my most luxurious aircraft, a Gulfstream G650. They believe they are simply chartering a jet from a faceless company their assistant found. They have absolutely no idea that I am the owner. The chilled champagne flute that my flight attendant is preparing to hand my mother, the one she will take with that practiced, elegant smile, well, it will not survive what happens next. I have spent my entire life starving for a single crumb of recognition from them. I yearned for it. I dreamed of a day they would look at me, really look at me, and say those 4 impossible words, "We are proud of you." I used to think I needed that validation to breathe. I believed my success wasn't real until they countersigned it. I thought my accomplishments were just noise until they confirmed they were music. But standing here in this terminal that I own, watching my team prepare for a flight, I finally realized the truth. I was not waiting for their approval. I was waiting for myself. I was waiting for this version of me, the 29-year-old CEO, to finally turn around, look that desperate little girl in the eye, and tell her that we never needed their permission at all. They think I am a failure. I know they do. My mother told her friends I worked at an airport, conjuring an image of me struggling behind a ticket counter. My father, I am sure, tells his partners that I am still finding my way, code for being financially unstable. They are about to see the truth. They are about to see what their disappointment built. Before I tell you exactly what happens when that crystal hits the marble, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Are you sitting in a room right now holding a dream that no one else can see? Are you in a situation where the people who are supposed to support you the most are the ones who doubt you the loudest? Are you building something powerful in the silence, brick by painful brick, while the world is noisy with criticism? If you are, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because you are in the right place. This channel is for women who understand real-life comeback stories, because sisters, this is definitely one of those stories. I take a deep breath. This private terminal is quieter than my childhood home ever was. That house was filled with the silent, crushing weight of expectation. This place is filled with the calm hum of purpose. The Italian marble floors shine under the soft, recessed lighting. The air smells of rich leather from the lounge chairs and freshly brewed Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee, not old furniture, and my mother's suffocating perfume. My team moves with a quiet, practiced precision that makes my heart swell with pride. I watch Catherine, my head flight attendant, making a final microscopic adjustment to the fresh white orchids by the door. The pilots, their uniforms immaculate, are reviewing the final international flight plan. This is not a hobby. This is not a phase. This is an empire. And the former rulers are about to walk right into it. I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, a wealthy, manicured suburb of Boston, where your entire life was measured by two things: the Ivy League insignia on your sweatshirt and the number of zeros at the end of your family's net worth. It was a world of quiet competition, of immaculate lawns, and even more immaculate reputations. My parents, Elias and Genevieve Sinclair, were the architects of one of those reputations. They ran Sinclair and Associates, a prestigious cutthroat management consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. Our 5-bedroom colonial-style house was their showpiece. It was immaculate, a fortress of quiet wealth filled with expensive, uncomfortable furniture that was meant to be admired, not lived in. It was a home designed for show, not for comfort. But for my parents, Sinclair and Associates was not just a business. You have to understand this. It was a legacy. It was something more sacred than money. My father, Elias, had built it from absolute scratch. For the first 20 years of his career, he was the only black man in almost every boardroom he entered. He had to fight through layers of systemic dismissal and quiet condescension. Sinclair and Associates was his proof. It was his armor. It was his unassailable argument to a white corporate world that he was not just as good as them, he was profoundly better. That legacy, built from his righteous anger and brilliance, became my burden. It was the heavy cloak I was expected to inherit. From my earliest memories, there was no question, no discussion. It was an established fact that I would one day take over the family business. I remember standing in the doorway of my father's home office when I was just 7 years old. He was on a conference call, his voice sharp and commanding. My mother, Genevieve, put her hands on my small shoulders and pulled me into the room. "Amara, pay attention to how your father handles this call," she whispered, her voice firm. "Someday you will need these skills when you run the company." My childhood was not my own. While other kids spent weekends at soccer practice or ballet lessons, my life was a curriculum. I was shuttled between mock business meetings at the dining room table and endless etiquette training sessions at the club. My bookshelf was a strategic arsenal. It contained more books on business strategy and corporate finance than it ever did storybooks or fairy tales. I had no friends over. Our house was not a home. It was a museum, a testament to my parents' success, and I was its primary exhibit. Every achievement was just another required stepping stone toward the predetermined future they had mapped out for me. I still remember the chill of bringing home an A- in 4th grade math. There was no "good job, Amara." My father did not congratulate me. He stared at the report card for a long, silent moment and then immediately hired a private tutor. "Sinclair women do not get A-minuses," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "We cannot build an empire on mediocrity." Mediocrity. That was his cardinal sin. It was his greatest fear. And in his world, mediocrity was defined as anything that was not the legacy. Anything that was not Sinclair and Associates. Anything that was not them. The pressure was relentless. It was a physical weight in the air of our perfect home. Dinnertime conversations were not about my day at school. They were interrogations. My parents would quiz me on complex business terms like leveraged buyout and market penetration before I even understood basic algebra. There was no room for childish interests. There was no room for normal developmental experiences. There was no room for air. There was only the legacy. And then, in that sterile, airless environment, I found one. I found an interest. I remember the exact moment the spark ignited. I was 8 years old. We were driving back from some sterile social function for my father's firm, gliding through the suburbs in our silent, polished luxury sedan. We passed a small regional airport. It was nothing special, just a strip of tarmac and a few hangars. But as I looked out the window, I saw it. A sleek, white private jet gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was accelerating down the runway impasse, storage to proper office space in the private terminal. Clients, it. I watched breathless as its nose lifted and it climbed with impossible grace into the vast blue sky. "Look at that," I whispered, pressing my face against the cool glass of the car window. How amazing would it be to fly one of those? It was not just the machine that fascinated me, it was the act. It was the freedom. That jet was leaving. It was ascending, breaking free from the perfectly gridded streets, the identical pristine houses, and the suffocating expectations. It was everything I was not. In our home, weighed down by the crushing gravity of the legacy and the relentless pressure to perform, the sky represented the only possible escape. It was limitless and clean, and no one owned it. My mother barely glanced up from her phone. "That is just a phase, Amara," she said, her voice dismissive. "Besides, pilots are just glorified bus drivers for the wealthy. You were meant for greater things." Greater things, her words. My parents' definition of greater was so narrow, so grounded. But despite their immediate dismissal that moment, planted a seed. It was a tiny, defiant seed of rebellion that quietly took root in the managed soil of my childhood. I began to live a secret life. I started checking out books about aviation from the school library. I would slip them inside my oversized textbooks, hiding them under my mattress, like other kids might hide comic books or forbidden candy. I read about engines. I read about aerodynamic principles. I read about Bessie Coleman and the other female pioneers who had taken to the sky. This was the one and only thing that belonged to me. Sinclair and Associates was theirs. The suffocating business strategy books on my shelf were theirs. The relentless expectation was theirs. But the sky was mine. Hiding those library books, reading them by flashlight long after I was supposed to be asleep, was the first true act of rebellion in my life. It was a small, precious secret in a life where nothing was private, where every minute was scheduled and scrutinized. By the time I was 16, the tension between my secret passion and my parents' public expectations had become a near constant, humming anxiety. Then I met Sarah. Her father, Captain Thomas Wilson, was a commercial airline pilot. He was the first adult I had ever met who actually lived the life I dreamed about. He noticed my interest immediately, the way my eyes lit up when he talked about his work. He would sometimes tell me stories about his flights, about the complex mechanics of aviation, about navigating storms. Those conversations were like finding water in a desert. "You have a good mind for this industry, you know," he told me one afternoon while I was at their house. "You ask the right questions. Have you ever considered aviation management? There are excellent programs that combine business skills with aviation expertise." That conversation changed everything. It was a lightning strike. Suddenly I saw it. A potential path. A bridge. It was a way to satisfy both my insatiable interest in the sky and the business-oriented upbringing that had been drilled into me since birth. It was a way to speak their language of business, but use it to say my own words to talk about my own world. I began researching aviation business programs in earnest, my heart pounding with a feeling I had not experienced before. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of genuine, unadulterated hope. My parents discovered my secret research one evening during my senior year. My father, Elias, had borrowed my laptop to check some figures for his own company. He must have seen the browser history. It was a long, incriminating list of aviation school websites, bookmarks, and downloaded financial aid forms. Embry-Riddle, Purdue, University of North Dakota. The argument that followed was not an argument, it was an explosion. It was the loudest, most violent sound our perfect, sterile, show-ready house had ever contained. My father paced the pristine living room, his face a deep, dangerous shade of red. My mother, Genevieve, sat rigid on the edge of the antique sofa. She did not move, but her disappointment radiated from her in waves of Arctic cold, a force perhaps even more cutting than his rage. "We have invested everything in preparing you for a serious career," my father shouted, his voice usually so measured and controlled, breaking with disbelief. Everything. The best schools, the tutors, the connections, and you want to throw it all away on some juvenile fantasy about airplanes. It is not about the planes. I tried to explain, my own voice shaking, but desperate to be heard. It is not a fantasy. Aviation is a complex, global, multi-billion-dollar industry. There are real business opportunities. It combines everything. He cut me off with a harsh, bitter laugh. Opportunity. What do you know about opportunity? You will be eaten alive, Amara. Do you think running a real business is a game? As he shouted that word game, the room seemed to spin. Suddenly, I was not standing in the living room as a senior in high school. I was 10 years old again. I was sitting at the top of the main staircase, my knees tucked under my chin, hidden in the shadows long after bedtime. I was listening to them argue in the office directly below me. My mother was crying. It was the only time I had ever heard her cry, a sound so rare it was terrifying. "Elias, that restaurant project has lost us almost everything," she sobbed, her voice thin. "We almost lost the house. Stick to what you know. Please, for God's sake, stick to consulting." I blinked, and I was back in the living room. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my father's furious red face, and for the first time in my life, I understood him. This was not just arrogance. It was not just his obsession with the legacy. It was fear. It was the raw, humiliating terror of his own failure, the ghost of a failed restaurant project that I never even knew existed. His anger was his own fear projected onto me. He was not just controlling me. He thought he was protecting me from the same public failure he had obviously endured. My mother finally spoke, her voice as sharp and thin as a shard of ice. "Darling," she said, addressing me, but looking at my father, Janet Thompson from the country club. "She told me just yesterday that her daughter, the one your age, was just accepted to Harvard Business School." Harvard. She turned her eyes on me, and they were filled with a cold, profound shame. "Meanwhile," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "you want to waste your education becoming, what exactly, a glorified travel agent." There it was, the comparison. It was their oldest and most effective weapon. The children of their colleagues, the sons and daughters of their friends, were always held up as the shining examples I was failing to match. The breaking point. The final snap came a few weeks later when the college acceptance letters arrived. I had applied to my parents' alma mater for Business Boston University, just as they demanded. I was accepted. But the thick official envelopes also arrived from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and from Purdue's aviation program. I was ecstatic. I held them in my hands, tangible proof that my dream was not a fantasy. My parents were not. My father saw the logos on the envelopes as I held them. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He simply walked over, took the letters from Embry-Riddle and Purdue from my hands, and tore them in half. Then he tore them into quarters, the sound of ripping paper echoing in the silent room. The pieces of my future, the pieces of my hope, fluttered down onto our perfect, expensive Oriental rug. "This discussion is over," he said, his voice cold and absolute. "You will attend Boston University's business program as planned, or you can pay for college yourself." I stared at the torn pieces of paper. I had no money. I had no resources. I had no way out. I was completely and utterly trapped, with no financial resources of my own and scholarships that would not cover the full crushing tuition. I made the only decision I could. I accepted the offer from Boston University. But as I nodded my head in compliance, as I verbally surrendered, something inside me fundamentally changed. Something broke, and then reset harder and colder than before. I was no longer their daughter. I was a secret architect, and I began in that very moment to plot my eventual escape. College became my strategic planning phase. On the surface, I was the perfect Sinclair daughter. I was the flawless business student, the one who always sat in the front row, who had all the answers, who earned the perfect grades my parents demanded. But on the inside, I was a double agent. I was a spy in the house of my own education. I approached every single class, every lecture, every required textbook with a singular secret purpose. My parents, in their infinite controlling wisdom, thought they were funding their future consultant. They had no idea they were funding my escape. I was building a Trojan horse right in the middle of their kingdom, using their own tools, their own money. My required finance class was not about corporate balance sheets to me. It was a deep dive into aircraft financing models and capital lease structures. My marketing principles course was not about branding consumer goods. It was a laboratory for developing aviation service concepts and pitching to a high net worth clientele. My economics class was not about abstract market theories. It was a practical study of how to apply those principles to the volatile pricing of private jet fuel and dynamic route optimization. I deliberately selected my electives with the same calculated precision. I chose classes that would look perfectly sensible on a future consultant's resume, but would be invaluable to my real hidden ambition. I took logistics management. My parents saw supply chains for their corporate clients. I saw flight crew scheduling and global parts inventory. I took transportation economics. They saw freight and shipping. I saw a map of regulatory loopholes and market opportunities. I took international business regulations. They saw global expansion for their firm. I saw the blueprint for international landing rights and customs compliance. My parents reviewed my class schedule every single semester. They viewed these choices as sensible, practical additions to a consulting career. They nodded in approval, never once suspecting that these were not just classes. They were puzzle pieces. They were the schematics for an entirely different machine I was building in secret. I lived a painful, exhausting double life. The code switching was constant and jarring. On weekends, I would drive home to Newton. I would put on the heavy, suffocating mask of Amara, the dutiful daughter. I would attend their sterile dinner parties. I would nod in all the right places as my father and his colleagues discussed client acquisitions and leveraged buyouts. I would smile, and I would play the part of the perfect compliant heiress, groomed and ready. I played it flawlessly. But then Sunday night would come. I would drive my modest car back to my dorm in Boston. The moment that door clicked shut behind me, the mask would fall away. I would become me again. I would head straight to the 24-hour library, not just to finish my business school assignments, but to do my real work. I spent hours, thousands of hours, teaching myself everything they had forbidden me to learn. I devoured everything I could find on Federal Aviation Administration certifications. I studied fixed-base operator management, learning the complex business of ground operations. I read maintenance logs and technical manuals I found online, my mind racing to connect the dots. The exhaustion was a physical thing. It was a weight I carried in my chest, a constant, dull ache. It was not just the fatigue of sleepless nights and endless studying. It was the exhaustion of the performance, the crushing mental fatigue of constantly switching codes, of having to remember which Amara I was supposed to be at any given moment. Was I Amara the daughter, the obedient consultant in training? Or was I Amara the future, the secret aviation CEO? There were moments late at night when the weight of the deception felt too heavy, when my own ambition felt like a madness. I would feel myself start to buckle, to think that maybe they were right. Maybe it was easier to just give in. But then I would look up from my desk and out the high library window. I would see the red and green navigation lights of a plane on its final approach to Logan Airport. I would watch it descend, graceful and free, cutting through the dark. And I would know I could not stop. I would not stop. The true game changer, the pivot point in my entire secret strategy, came during my junior year. It was not a class, it was a person. His name was Professor Evan Grant. He was not a lifelong academic. He was a shark who had decided to teach. Before joining the university, he had been a senior executive at a major airline for 20 years. He understood the blood sport of the business, from hostile union negotiations to the billion-dollar chess game of fleet acquisition. He was the real deal. He gave a guest lecture in one of my advanced economics courses. He spoke my secret language. He talked about fuel hedging dynamic pricing models and the complex calculus of route profitability. He was not talking theory. He was talking reality. While the other students scribbled notes about supply and demand, I was on the edge of my seat, my mind racing. After the lecture, as everyone else filed out, I lingered. I waited until he was alone packing his briefcase. I approached him, my heart pounding. "Professor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I have a question about your model for calculating perishable asset depreciation. You applied it to cargo space, but could it also apply to unsold seats on a time-sensitive charter? He stopped packing. He looked up at me, truly looked with a sharp analytical gaze I recognized. It was the same look my father used. "Go on," he said. That one question turned into a conversation that lasted for 2 hours. We left the lecture hall, walked across campus, and kept talking. He bought me a coffee. We sat in a sterile campus cafe, and we talked well past dinner time. He did not talk down to me. He debated with me. Finally, he leaned back, studying me with that same curious, intense expression. "You understand the aviation business model," he said, his voice quiet. "Better than most industry veterans I know. Your questions are 5 steps ahead of your peers. Why in the world are you not in our aviation management track?" And in that moment, under the harsh fluorescent lights, the dam broke. I do not know why I trusted him, but I did. I told him everything. The family expectations, the crushing, suffocating weight of the Sinclair legacy, the explosive fight, the torn acceptance letters. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He did not judge. He did not offer pity. When I finished the story hanging in the air between us, he simply took a sip of his coffee. "Family expectations are powerful forces, Amara," he said finally. His voice was calm, a statement of fact. "They are perhaps the most powerful force on earth, but ultimately, you must live with the consequences of choices made to please others." That conversation changed the atmosphere of my secret war. He was the first adult, the first person in the real world of business who saw me. He did not see Amara Sinclair's daughter. He did not see a rebellious child with a cute hobby. He saw a professional. He saw a colleague. He saw potential. He validated my secret identity. Professor Grant became my unofficial mentor. He was my handler. He directed me toward obscure resources industry white papers and complex regulatory filings that were not on any syllabus. He started introducing me quietly via email to his network of industry contacts. "This is Amara Sinclair," he would write. "She is a student, but she thinks like an executive. Take her call." He was the one who helped me secure an internship for the summer between my junior and senior year. He made one phone call. It was not a fancy high-level internship. It was a real operations-focused role at a regional airline. I told my parents a carefully crafted, technically true lie. "It is a corporate strategy position," I explained to them over dinner, "at a major transportation company." They heard the words corporate strategy and major transportation and nodded satisfied. It sounded like consulting. It sounded serious. But I spent that entire summer in the trenches. I was not in a boardroom. I was in the windowless operations center. I sat with the crew schedulers learning the impossibly complex matrix of FAA rest rules. I shadowed the maintenance supervisors learning about airframes and engine cycles. I worked with the gate operations managers, learning how to turn a plane around in 35 minutes. It was the hardest I had ever worked and the happiest I had ever been. By graduation day, I had done it. I had fulfilled their every demand. I earned my business degree, summa cum laude, exactly as my father had commanded. I walked across the stage, a perfect symbol of their victory, and accepted my diploma to their beaming, proud applause. They had won. They sat in the front row accepting congratulations from other parents, convinced they had successfully contained my phase and molded me into the perfect Sinclair heir. That is what they thought. What they did not know, what they could not see, was that I was a Trojan horse. They did not know that alongside that pristine business degree, I had also built a small but valuable network of real aviation contacts. They did not know I had accumulated thousands of hours of specialized practical knowledge. They thought they had forged me in their image. They had no idea they had just financed with their own money my entire escape plan. 2 weeks after graduation, the 2 envelopes arrived on the same day. They landed on the flimsy particle board desk of my off-campus apartment, a stark defining choice laid bare. The first envelope was exactly as I had pictured it. It was heavy, oversized, and made of a thick, creamy cardstock that probably cost $10 per sheet. In the top left corner, the logo for Sinclair and Associates was embossed in deep, authoritative navy blue. It felt less like a letter and more like a summons. I did not even need to open it to know what was inside. It was the junior partnership track. It was the substantial six-figure starting salary. It was the clear, pre-paved, meticulously planned path to eventually taking over the family business. It was my entire life, sealed with my father's implied approval. I held it in my hand. It was physically heavy. It felt like it weighed 20 pounds. But that was not just the paper. It was heavy with the crushing, suffocating weight of their expectations. It was heavy with the 30 years of my parents' lives, their struggle, their ambition, and their absolute unyielding belief that their path was the only one. It was heavy with the silent, judgmental dinners in that perfect Newton home. It was heavy with the price of the legacy, a price I was now expected to pay by surrendering my own future. This was not a job offer. It was a pair of beautiful, gleaming 18-karat golden handcuffs. The second envelope was its opposite in every conceivable way. It was a standard, thin, white business envelope, the kind you get in junk mail. It was slightly crumpled from its journey through the postal system. The return address was simple, printed in black ink, Atlantic Regional Airlines Operations Department. I tore it open. Inside was a single, flimsy piece of paper folded in three. It was an offer for an entry-level operations position. The salary was not substantial. It was barely livable. It was, I calculated quickly, almost exactly 1/3 of what my parents' firm was offering. It was a job that meant long hours, high stress, and starting at the absolute bottom of the food chain. I held that single piece of paper in my other hand. It was almost weightless. It was just paper. Just ink. But as I stood there holding both, I felt the truth. The heavy cream-colored envelope from my parents was a burden. The thin, flimsy paper from the airline was a key. It was a lockpick. This was not a choice between two jobs. It was never about the jobs. This was a choice between two lives. It was the life they had meticulously designed for me, a life of comfort and prestige and slow, quiet suffocation. Or it was the life I had to build for myself from scratch, from the dirt, a life of uncertainty and struggle, and maybe, just maybe, a single cleansing breath of real freedom. I stood there in the silence of my small apartment, the golden handcuffs in my left hand and the flimsy key in my right. I looked out my window. My apartment was small, but it had a clear view of the sky. Far in the distance, I saw the silver glint of an airplane climbing, turning east over the harbor, heading toward the open ocean, toward Logan Airport. It was a simple, everyday sight, but in that moment, it was everything. It was a sign. I dropped both letters on the desk. I picked up my phone. I dialed my parents' number. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice bright and even, the familiar, compliant tone slipping on like a well-worn coat. "Yes, I would love to. How about dinner tomorrow night? Your favorite place? Yes, I have news. I will see you then." I hung up the phone. I walked to my closet and looked at the conservative dark gray business suit they had bought me for my post-graduation interviews. It was a costume. I would wear it one last time. It was time to end this play. It was time to finally definitively bring down the curtain. I arrived at the restaurant exactly at 8. It was their favorite, an old-world steakhouse in the Back Bay, all dark wood-white tablecloths and hushed, important voices. I saw them immediately at their regular corner table. They were already there, a silver ice bucket at their side, 2 half-full glasses of champagne glittering under the low light. They were laughing, my father's head tilted back, my mother's hand resting on his arm. They looked radiant. They looked victorious. They were celebrating preemptively their victory, my victory as they saw it. I smoothed the front of my gray wool suit, the one they had bought for me, and walked over. My father stood as I approached, his smile wide and deeply satisfied. "There she is," he boomed, kissing me on the cheek. He raised his glass as I sat down, the waiter already pouring a third for me. "To the newest consultant at Sinclair and Associates." My father toasted, his voice full of paternal pride. I took a deep breath. My own glass sat untouched, the bubbles rising and disappearing. I placed my hands flat on the table, feeling the cool, stiff linen. "I need to tell you both something important," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the celebratory haze. "I have accepted a position. I will be working with Atlantic Regional Airlines in their operations department." The world did not exactly stop. The restaurant did not go silent. Around us, forks still clinked against china and muted conversations about finance and politics continued. But our world, our tiny, pressurized ecosystem at that corner table, came to an absolute frozen halt. I could hear the tiny fizzing of the champagne in my glass. I could hear the sound of my mother's fork as she slowly, deliberately placed it on the edge of her bread plate. It was not a sound of anger, not yet. It was the sound of a door being locked. It was the sound of an ending. My mother's hand, the one holding her champagne flute, froze halfway to her lips. Her eyes, which had been sparkling with pride, turned flat and cold. "You have done what?" The next hour was a special kind of hell. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of their disappointment played in 3 movements. First came the disbelief, the baffled, almost comical shock. Then came the anger, my father's voice rising, his consultant voice turning into the father voice that had terrified me as a child. Then came the third most lethal movement, the manipulation. My father called me ungrateful. He listed as if reading an invoice every investment they had ever made in me. The private schools, the tutors, the European trips, the Ivy League education. "We gave you everything," he said, his voice thick with a genuine wounded sense of betrayal. "Everything for this, to throw it all away." My mother suggested I was having some kind of breakdown. She asked in a tone of false clinical concern if I was feeling all right. She suggested I take some time off, perhaps see a doctor. She was trying to pathologize my independence to frame my choice as an illness that could be cured. "This is not a rejection of you." I tried to explain, my voice low and steady, desperate for them to hear the simple truth. "This is not an illness. This is me finally following a career path that actually truly excites me." I said the words, and I knew as they left my mouth that they were the most honest words I had ever spoken to them. And I knew in the same instant that it did not matter. They were not listening. They were not capable of hearing. They were not angry because I was making a bad choice. They were angry because I was making a choice at all. My father, seeing that his anger and guilt were not working, adopted his final, most devastating tactic: dismissal. He leaned back in his chair and waved his hand as if swatting away a fly. "It is a phase," he declared, his voice full of a weary, patronizing finality. "A childish little rebellion. Fine." He looked at my mother, then back at me. "When you are tired of working at that glorified bus station, when you are done playing pretend our door will be open, you will come to your senses eventually." I looked at them. I really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in my life. I saw 2 brilliant, powerful, deeply unhappy people. I saw 2 people I loved who loved me, but who were completely, terrifyingly incapable of ever seeing me. They could only see a reflection of themselves, a vessel for their own unfinished ambitions. I stood up. My chair scraped quietly against the wooden floor. My champagne glass was still full, still untouched. "Thank you for the dinner," I said. I turned and I walked out of the restaurant, past the bar, and out into the cool night air. I drove back to my apartment. I sat in my car for a long time in the dark, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt utterly, completely, and terrifyingly alone. It was a cold, hollow feeling. I had no safety net. I had no home to run to. I had just burned the only bridge I had ever known. But then I took a breath, and another, and I realized something else. I was breathing. I was breathing. It was the first true, deep, unconstricted breath of my adult life. I was alone, but I was free. I had chosen the cold, open air, even if it meant I might freeze. The following weekend, I moved out of my parents' guest house for good. I found a small, cheap, 1-bedroom apartment near the airport. The paint was peeling and the floors creaked. But from my tiny bedroom window, if I leaned to the side, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the runways. The next 2 years were a crash course in humility. Not just humility, but a raw, unvarnished education in reality. I started in customer service. That is the official title. What it meant was that I, Amara Sinclair, summa cum laude graduate of Boston University, was the person on the other end of the phone when a passenger's luggage ended up in Omaha instead of Orlando. I was the one being screamed at when a flight was canceled due to weather. I was at the very bottom. The contrast between my new life and the one I had left behind was a stark daily slap in the face. I would scroll through my social media feed in the 5-minute break between abusive calls. I would see my former classmates. They were posting photos from luxury vacations in the south of France paid for with their massive first-year banking bonuses. They were buying downtown condos. I was working a double shift on Thanksgiving Day. I worked Christmas Eve. I worked New Year's Day. I volunteered for every extra project, every undesirable shift. I was a sponge soaking up everything. I did not just stay in my customer service cubicle. I spent my breaks in the operations center. I talked to the crew schedulers. I learned about maintenance requirements. I memorized FAA compliance regulations. I lived on almost nothing. I wore secondhand clothes and ate instant noodles. But every single paycheck, a small, painful percentage went into a savings account. I was building a runway, not just living on one. Contact with my parents dwindled. It shrank to occasional strained holiday phone calls that felt more like a diplomatic obligation than a family connection. How is work, Amara? It is fine, Mom. I'm learning a lot. A long pause. I learned through a cousin that when relatives asked about me, my mother would give a vague, sad smile and say I was still finding myself, that I would come around eventually. My father, I was told, simply changed the subject. They had erased me from their story. The narrative of the Sinclair legacy no longer included my chapter, and that I have to admit was a specific, sharp kind of pain. It was the pain of being disowned, not in words, but in quiet, polite public omission. But it was also strangely a liberation. The performance was over. I no longer had to wear the mask of the dutiful daughter. I was free from the crushing weight of their expectations. I did not have to perform anymore. I just had to work. And I worked. My dedication did not go unnoticed. After 18 grueling months, I was promoted. I was pulled out of the trenches and made an operations coordinator. This was a real step. It was not a title, it was a function. I was no longer just answering calls. I was in the nerve center. I had visibility into the entire system, the complex, chaotic dance of keeping aircraft safely and efficiently in the air. The pivotal moment, the one that changed everything, came disguised as a disaster. It was a brutal January nor'easter. A blizzard shut down all of New England. Logan Airport was a sea of chaos. All flights grounded the terminal, overflowing with furious, stranded passengers. And in the middle of that chaos was Marcus Shaw, the CEO of Tech Vision Enterprises. He was apoplectic, trying to get to a critical company-saving meeting in Chicago. I was the operations coordinator on duty. My desk was the center of the storm. While everyone else was just saying, no, I was looking for a how. I found one. One of our aircraft, a small regional jet, needed to get to Chicago. It was scheduled for a mandatory maintenance check. It was scheduled to fly empty, a ferry flight. I checked the regulations. I knew we could get regulatory approval for a ferry flight with limited non-revenue passengers, even with the weather closures, if it was for an operational necessity. I made 3 calls. I navigated the bureaucratic hurdles with the FAA tower. I coordinated with the maintenance chief and scrambled a flight crew. It was a high-wire act. I personally walked Mr. Shaw through the empty, echoing terminal to the aircraft. He was a tall, imposing man, and he was still radiating pure, uncut fury. As we waited by the gate for the final clearance, he looked down at me, his eyes sharp. "Most people out there," he barked, gesturing to the chaotic terminal, "would have just told me it was impossible." I looked up at him, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten. I smiled a small, tired smile. "In aviation, Mr. Shaw," I said, "impossible usually just means nobody has found the right regulatory exception yet." He made his meeting. I did not hear anything for 3 weeks. I just went back to the grind. Then my office phone rang. It was his executive assistant. Mr. Shaw wanted to offer me a position. He wanted me to come build and manage his entire corporate flight department. The salary he offered was nearly double what I was making. It was the move. It was the next step. I accepted the position with Marcus Shaw immediately. It was not just a job, it was an invitation to the inner circle. It was the next crucial phase of my real education. For the next 3 years, I did not just work, I immersed myself. I became a creature of the private aviation world. My official role was managing his corporate flight department, but I used that position to learn everything. I dove headfirst into the opaque world of aircraft acquisition, learning the complex dance of negotiations, financing, and pre-buy inspections. I learned about client expectations at the highest level, a world where speed was assumed, but the real currency was seamless, invisible, perfect service. I learned about crew management, the complex logistics of international routes, and the razor-thin economics of the charter market. I built relationships. I networked with the fixed-base operators, the maintenance facility directors, the high-end catering companies, and the myriad vendors that made the industry run. I was a student, a sponge. And most importantly, I was an observer. I watched. I listened. I took quiet notes. I saw the inefficiencies. I heard the recurring complaints from other executives. I saw the gaps in the market, the places where the old rigid models were failing the new fast-paced client. After I had been there for 3 years, after I had stabilized the department and earned Marcus Shaw's complete trust, that small, stupid 8-year-old part of me spoke up again. It was a lingering flicker of hope, a desperate, naive wish that this time they would finally see me. I was an executive now. I had a significant title. I had a team. I decided to try one last time. I invited them to dinner. I chose the venue carefully. Not their home, not their favorite old-world steakhouse. I chose a neutral restaurant, a modern minimalist space in the seaport. I came prepared. I brought a small, professionally bound portfolio with me. It was not emotional. It was just data, my executive title, my list of responsibilities, photographs of the 3 multi-million-dollar jets I was now managing, a summary of the operations I had built for TechVision, highlighting the 20 professionals on my team. I had hoped. That is the truly pathetic part, is it not? After everything, a small, naive piece of me still believed that Director of Corporate Aviation would be enough, that the numbers, the assets, the clear business success would finally register. My mother Genevieve picked up the portfolio. She glanced at the cover and then flipped through the materials with a distracted, almost bored air. She barely registered the photographs of the aircraft or the organizational chart. "Well," she said, setting the folder down on the table as if it were a menu. She signaled for the waiter. "It is nice you have found stable employment, dear." She gave me that tight, polite, social smile. "Though being a glorified secretary for a businessman is hardly what your Ivy League education prepared you for." The air left my lungs. The words hit me with a physical force. "I am not a secretary, Mother," I said. My voice was dangerously calm, frighteningly even. "I manage a multi-million-dollar aviation operation. I have a team of 20 professionals who report to me. I handle aircraft acquisitions and international logistics." My father, Elias, who had been watching me, just waved his hand dismissively. He did not even look at the portfolio. He cut into his steak. "The offer to join the family business still stands, Amara," he said, as if I had not spoken. "You should seriously consider it. We have had an exceptional year. Our client list now includes 3 Fortune 100 companies." He stressed the words, his benchmark for reality. "That is real business experience. What you are doing," he said, gesturing vaguely at my portfolio. "It is a good start. It is a nice hobby. But it is time to come home." I left early that night. I said I had an early flight to manage a lie they easily accepted, as it reinforced their narrative of my service role. I walked out of the restaurant into the cold Boston air. And that was it. Not the torn letters. Not the explosive dinner after graduation. This quiet, casual, complete assassination of my reality. This polite, dismissive conversation. That was the real breaking point. I drove home to my apartment, the one overlooking the runways. This time, I did not cry. This time, I did not feel that hot rage of injustice. I did not feel heartbroken. I felt for the first time in my life a profound and complete nothingness. I was numb, and that numbness was a revelation. It was the sound of the final rusted hook they had in me, the one I had been desperately holding on to my entire life, finally ripping free. The desperate childish need for their approval, the lingering hope that one day they would see me. It did not just fade. It was surgically, cleanly, and completely removed. It was gone. It was over. I stood at my apartment window for a long time, watching the lights of the planes taking off and landing. I finally truly accepted the painful truth. They would never acknowledge my path. They would never see my world as legitimate. Their approval, the validation I had craved like oxygen, would never come. And if I was going to find fulfillment, if I was going to be whole, I would have to find it on my own terms. I would have to validate myself. I turned away from the window. I walked to my small desk. I picked up a clean yellow legal pad and a pen. I knew exactly what was wrong with the private aviation industry. I knew what executives like Marcus Shaw complained about. I knew what the gaps were. And I knew in that moment, with a cold, clear, liberated certainty, exactly what I had to build. The idea for Elite Aviation Solutions was born right then, not from a place of passion, but from a place of absolute ice-cold clarity. The idea for Elite Aviation Solutions was not a lightning strike of inspiration. It was not a dream. It was a solution born from 3 years of listening to pure, unadulterated frustration. It was forged in the cold, hard reality of my job. I had a front row seat listening to my boss, Marcus Shaw, and his entire executive team complain relentlessly about the private aviation industry. I heard them rant after almost every trip. The pricing was a black box, a guess-how-much game of opaque quotes, hidden surcharges, and arbitrary minimums. The service quality was a coin toss, an experience that was 5 stars one day, and a disorganized, embarrassing disaster the next. The scheduling was rigid, inflexible, and forced high-level executives to adapt to the aircraft's schedule, not the other way around. While I listened to the clients complain, my own research showed me the other side of the broken equation. I saw a market filled with individual aircraft owners who were drowning, absolutely struggling under the crushing, colossal costs of ownership. Their multi-million-dollar assets, their prized jets, were sitting idle in cold hangars for 25 or 28 days a month, bleeding money in maintenance fees, crew salaries, and hangar costs. The clients were angry. The owners were desperate. The market was fundamentally broken. I did not just see a gap, I saw a gaping canyon. That night, after the dinner with my parents, I began sketching a new model on that same yellow legal pad. I was not just building an idea, I was building a weapon. I designed a business model for a more flexible, more transparent, and utterly reliable approach to private aviation. It was a hybrid. It was a service that would combine the consistency, safety, and personalization of an owned aircraft department with the flexibility and cost-effectiveness of a charter service. We would use technology to provide real-time transparent pricing, eliminating the opaque quotes. We would build a membership model that gave frequent clients priority access. We would wrap all of it in an obsessive, predictive white glove layer of customer service and logistics. For the next 6 months, I vanished from my own life. I became a ghost at my own job. I spent every evening, every weekend, every single holiday locked in my small apartment, refining the business plan. I ran financial projections until my eyes burned and the numbers blurred. I researched regulatory requirements, finding the loopholes that would become our strategic advantages. I lived on nothing but black coffee and a raw, simmering determination. I would often work until 3 or 4 in the morning, collapse on my sofa for a few hours, and then get up, put on my executive armor, and go to my high-paying day job at TechVision, my secret burning in my briefcase. This was without question the most terrifying thing I had ever done. It was far scarier than the dinner where I defied my parents. That was an emotional break. This was a financial and professional cliff. I was 25 years old. I was, for the first time in my life, completely stable. I had a prestigious job, an executive title, and a high salary that was finally rapidly growing my savings. I was safe. I had built a secure, independent life. And now I was making a detailed, calculated plan to set that entire life on fire. I was about to risk every single dollar I had scraped together and my entire hard-won professional reputation for an idea. An idea on paper. An idea my parents would have laughed at, another childish hobby. The fear was a cold, constant presence, a knot in my stomach that never went away. This fear is what finally pushed me to act. When the business plan was no longer just an idea, when it was a fortress of data, when the numbers were unassailable, I did not go to a bank. I did not pitch to a venture capital firm. I made a calculated move. I scheduled a single 1-hour meeting with the one man who already trusted my operational mind, Marcus Shaw. He was not my mentor. He was my boss and a ruthless businessman. He did not smile. He did not offer encouragement. He reviewed the plan methodically, silently, turning page after page in the binder I had prepared. He asked pointed, brutal questions that tested every single assumption, every projection. He pushed, he poked, he actively tried to find the weakness. Finally, he closed the binder. He sat back, tenting his fingers, and stared at me for a long, silent minute. "The aviation business eats startups for breakfast, Amara," he warned, his voice grave. "It is a capital-heavy nightmare. It will bleed you dry before you even get off the ground." He paused, tapping his finger on the binder's cover. "But this model, this addresses the exact specific pain points I complain about every single week." He looked at me, a long, appraising stare. "What do you need to get started?" I did not hesitate. I told him the number. He negotiated me down exactly as I expected. With Marcus Shaw as my first angel investor contributing $500,000 and my own life savings $70,000, every last penny I had in the world, Elite Aviation Solutions was born. I immediately leased a tiny, windowless office in what was essentially a converted storage room at the Bedford Regional Airport, far from the polished towers of downtown Boston. I gave my 2 weeks' notice at TechVision, walking away from the stability, the salary, and the safety net. And then I took the terrifying, exhilarating, and irreversible leap into the unknown life of an entrepreneur. The early days were not just hard, they were brutal. It was a raw, relentless daily education in failure, humility, and fear. We had our first aircraft lease agreement lined up. It was a beautiful, efficient light jet perfect for our launch. 3 days before we were scheduled to sign the final papers and take delivery, the owner pulled out. No real reason given, just a cold email from his lawyer. I found out why a week later through an industry contact I had made during my internship. It turned out a competitor, one of the established old boys clubs in the region, had gotten wind of my new company. The CEO had taken the aircraft's owner out for drinks. He had quietly, gently suggested that the owner might want to reconsider. He had apparently whispered that I, the 25-year-old founder, was a risky partner. My contact told me they never had to be explicit. They never used the word black. They never used the word woman. They did not have to. They just used the code. They said I was unproven. They said I was too young. They said I was not a culture fit for the serious, high-stakes world of aviation assets. I was a 25-year-old black woman standing in front of 60-year-old white men, the gatekeepers of this industry, asking them to trust me with their multi-million-dollar assets. The exhaustion I felt in those first months was not just from the 18-hour workdays, though there were plenty of those. It was a deeper systemic exhaustion. It was the crushing, bone-deep fatigue of having to be 3 times as smart, 3 times as prepared, and 10 times as polished, just to be considered half as credible. I remember walking into a bank, trying to secure our initial line of credit. I had my business plan, the one Marcus Shaw had called unassailable. I had meticulous financial projections, market analysis, everything. The loan officer, an older white man who looked just like my father's golf partners, looked at my materials. He looked at me. He looked at my projections again. Then he leaned back, looked at me over the top of his glasses, and smiled a tight, thin, patronizing smile. "Little lady," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you have any idea how much an airplane actually costs?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the heavy mahogany desk over. I wanted to ask him if he knew how much I knew. I wanted to ask him if he had ever calculated the hourly operational cost of a Gulfstream 450, including variable fuel burn, blended maintenance reserves, and crew overhead, and then cross-reference that with Part 135 regulatory compliance costs. Instead, I smiled. I smiled that polite, patient, non-threatening smile that Black women learn to perfect by the time they are 10 years old, and I calmly, respectfully explained my own numbers back to him as if he were a child. Patience, I learned, is also a weapon. The banking issues, the constant reviews, and underwriting delays held up our initial financing for nearly 6 agonizing weeks. I had to make payroll. I deferred my own salary. I did not take a single dollar for the first 9 months. I stopped going home to my tiny apartment. I could not spare the commuting time or the gas money. I slept on an uncomfortable secondhand couch in that tiny, windowless, converted storage room office. I had a small core team of 5 employees. Most of them were people who had followed me from my previous positions, people who believed in the vision, who knew what I was capable of. They agreed to take significantly reduced salaries in exchange for future equity. Their faith in me, their willingness to gamble their own security on my vision, their belief when I was drowning in doubt, it still humbles me to this day. And then, just when we thought we had weathered the worst of the financial storm, we finally secured our first aircraft. We finally launched our service. Our inaugural client, the one our entire first quarter projection was based on, canceled their contract. Just like that. A sterile email on a Tuesday morning. Corporate restructuring. Their executive travel budget had been completely eliminated. We were suddenly terrifyingly left with massive aircraft lease payments, crew salaries, and crushing insurance costs. We had 0 revenue coming in. We were dangerously, breathtakingly close to complete catastrophic bankruptcy before we had even finished our first quarter. It was an absolute waking nightmare. Our first real breakthrough, the lifeline that pulled us back from the financial cliff, came disguised as another company's crisis. We were weeks, perhaps only days away from having to shut it all down, from admitting my father was right. The phone rang in our tiny office. It was the frantic, high-strung executive assistant of a CEO from a mid-sized tech company. His major first-class flight on a commercial airline had just been abruptly canceled. He was stranded, and he absolutely had to be in Chicago for a make-or-break investor meeting the next morning. He had called, she said, every other charter company in the region. Every single one, the entire old boys network was booked solid. They could not be bothered. But we were not booked. We were desperate. We had one beautiful available aircraft sitting on the tarmac, an asset that was costing us thousands of dollars. Every hour it sat silent. I did not delegate this. I did not hand it off to my small team. This was not just a flight. It was our entire future. I took the call myself. I personally oversaw every single infinitesimal detail. I got on the phone with the assistant, and I did not just ask about allergies. I asked about preferences. I found out he preferred his catering to be high protein and low carbohydrate. I found out he preferred a specific brand of sparkling water at room temperature. We had it all catered and waiting. I personally coordinated the ground transportation, ensuring a high-end black sedan would be waiting on the tarmac at his destination, its engine running the moment he stepped off the plane. I briefed the flight crew myself. I checked the cabin. I made sure every single preference was met before he even knew he had it. We were not just providing a flight. We were providing a seamless, zero-friction, perfect experience. He made his meeting. He saved his deal. He was, according to his assistant, astonished. He was used to the transactional, often abrasive world of charter. He was not used to this obsessive, predictive level of service. The following week, his office called. They did not just want to thank us. They signed a 6-month contract for all their executive travel. But he did something even more valuable. He was an influential, loud voice in the Boston tech community. He went on his professional social media account and wrote a detailed, glowing post about what he called our white glove rescue mission. I still have the text of it saved. Elite aviation solutions delivered when the big names could not, he wrote to his thousands of followers. The flight was perfect, that is the baseline. But the service, the personal attention to detail, it makes you feel like you are their only client. They saved us. That single public testimonial, that unsolicited endorsement from a respected high-profile CEO was the key. It was the match that lit the fire. It unlocked everything. That one post led to 3 new clients within a month, all of them executives in his network who were tired of the same old rigid charter services. Suddenly, the little lady who was too risky was the only name people were talking about. The buzz got us noticed. Small Business Aviation magazine, a small but respected industry journal, included us in their Innovators to Watch section. It was just a small paragraph, but it was in print. It gave us credibility. It gave us a legitimacy that went beyond our actual size and our very short, very troubled history. 8 months after launching, 8 months of pure, unadulterated 24-hour-a-day survival, we were stable. We were stable enough to add our second aircraft to the fleet. It was a mid-sized jet capable of handling the longer domestic routes our new clients were demanding. The day we signed the paperwork for that second jet, I looked at our financials. I ran the numbers twice, 3 times, because I did not believe them. We were in the black. We had officially completed our first month of operational profit. It was a modest profit, almost laughably small compared to the sums my father dealt in. But it was not zero. It was not negative. I took my tiny, exhausted team of 5 out to celebrate. We did not go to a high-end steakhouse. We went to a simple Italian restaurant near the airport. But that meal, that small shared victory, felt like we had just conquered the entire world. It was a universe away from the financial cliff we had been dangling from just a few short months earlier. With the growing business volume with actual real revenue, we were finally able to move. We left the converted storage room. We left the office with the peeling paint, the single flickering fluorescent light, and the uncomfortable stained couch I had slept on for more nights than I could count. We relocated to a proper office space in the private terminal, a small but professional suite of rooms with clean walls, new carpet, and actual windows. I remember the first day in that new office. The first time one of our new clients, a real paying 6-month contract client, stepped out of their luxury car and into our new professionally designed reception area, I had to walk away. I went into the small, clean, private bathroom. I stood there gripping the sides of the new porcelain sink. I looked at my reflection in the clean, polished mirror. And I just cried. I cried not from sadness or fear, but from a profound, rattling, whole-body sense of relief. It was working. All the sleepless nights, all the doubt, all the condescending little lady and risky partner comments, all the fear. It was all being answered. It was real. It was working. As the company stabilized and the immediate suffocating fear of bankruptcy receded, my focus shifted from pure survival to strategic differentiation. We were not just going to be an option. We were going to be the only option. I focused first on the industry's greatest weakness, its technology. We developed our own proprietary booking software from the ground up. The old guard, my competitors, loved the old opaque system. They loved making clients call for a quote, loved the hidden fees and the fuel surcharges buried in the fine print. We eliminated all of it. Our platform provided real-time aircraft availability and completely transparent dynamic pricing. What you saw was what you paid. No hidden fees, no mystery. It was revolutionary simply because it was honest. Next, we built a true concierge department. Our competitors sold a flight a seat from point A to point B. We managed the entire experience, the entire logistical chain of our clients' lives. Our concierge team handled everything surrounding the flight. We arranged the high-end ground transportation. We handled the hotel arrangements, leveraging our new partnerships to secure upgrades. We made the impossible to get restaurant reservations. We handled the special requests, the obscure, the difficult, the last minute. We were not a charter company. We were a mobile executive office. Our marketing reflected this new reality. We focused relentlessly on 2 key messages: absolute reliability and radical personalization. While our competitors advertised gold fixtures, exotic wood, and meaningless opulence, we promised something far more valuable to our target clients. We promised them their time saved and maximized. Luxury was the baseline that was assumed. Time was the true commodity. With a stable platform and a growing reputation, I began to hunt for talent. I strategically, selectively recruited experienced professionals from our larger competitors. I did not just offer them competitive compensation. I offered them something those old stagnant companies could not. I offered them a culture. I offered them a place where innovation was rewarded, not stifled. And as the company grew, as I hired more people and built out these departments, I realized I was building something larger than a business. I was building an answer. It was a quiet, powerful structural rebuttal to my entire childhood. My father's firm, Sinclair and Associates, was famously proudly cutthroat. It was a place of brutal hours, high employee turnover, internal politics, and purely transactional relationships. Elite Aviation Solutions would be the absolute antithesis. I decided consciously that our company culture would be built on two pillars: excellence and empathy. We celebrated our achievements publicly and loudly. When someone made a mistake, we addressed it privately with respect as a growth opportunity, not as a failure to be shamed. We promoted based on performance and merit, not politics or tenure. I instituted family-friendly policies like real paid leave and flexible scheduling, acknowledging that our employees had lives outside the hangar. This was unheard of in the demanding 24/7 aviation industry. This was my quiet rebellion. My parents had taught me that business success required a certain ruthless transactional coldness, a belief that people were interchangeable cogs in a machine. I was building a multi-million-dollar enterprise that was proving day after day that you could succeed, not in spite of treating people well, but precisely because of it. As our profile rose, I began accepting speaking engagements at industry events. I was initially terrified, but I recognized the importance of building my personal credibility as a leader. And as I spoke, I remembered what it felt like to be that young woman, that student so desperate for a mentor, for just one person in the industry to see me. So I created the Elite Aviation Solutions Scholarship Fund. It was not just a check. It was not just about tuition. It was a dedicated mentorship program providing funding and, more importantly, guidance and access for young women, especially women of color, trying to break into the male-dominated fields of aviation and aerospace. I was building the world I had wished for. The crowning achievement of that period came in an email. The Regional Business Journal included me in their annual 40 Under 40 list of successful entrepreneurs. I bought a copy of the magazine. I saw my professional photograph standing on the tarmac next to one of our jets. It was real. I bought a second copy. I did not write a note. I simply put the magazine into a clean 9x12 manila envelope. I addressed it to my father, Amara Sinclair, at the offices of Sinclair and Associates. I mailed it. I waited. I checked my voicemail. I checked my email. I received no reply. I did not expect one. By our 5th anniversary, Elite Aviation Solutions had grown beyond even my most optimistic sleep-deprived projections. We were not just surviving, we were dominant. We were operating 10 aircraft. We had offices in 5 major cities from Boston to Miami. Our annual revenue had crossed the 8-figure mark, and we were doing it with healthy, sustainable profit margins that exceeded the industry averages. We were winning. The National Aviation Business Association awarded us their coveted Service Excellence Award, the one my old guard competitors had traded among themselves for years. On a personal level, my life had transformed. The frugal, desperate woman sleeping on an office couch was a ghost. I had purchased a luxury condominium in downtown Boston, a high-rise space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the harbor. The view was not of a runway, but of the open ocean. I had in one large, satisfying payment paid off my entire student loan debt almost 7 years after graduation. I was financially free. I was successful by any objective metric. But there was always a but. Despite the objective, measurable, undeniable proof of my success, the disconnect with my family remained. It was a cold, painful void. The silence from Newton was deafening. It was not just a lack of support. It was an active, ongoing campaign of quiet dismissal. I heard through a mutual acquaintance, a cousin who still spoke to both sides, that my mother had been at a social function, a charity gala. When asked about me about her other child, my mother had apparently sighed a practiced, martyred sound. Amara, she had said, her voice full of performative sadness. She is honestly the family disappointment. Such a shame. I experienced it firsthand too. At an industry conference in Atlanta, our paths unexpectedly crossed. I was there as a keynote speaker. They were there as attendees networking. I was walking behind them in a crowded hallway. I overheard my mother speaking to one of her colleagues, a man who had known me since I was a child. He asked about me. "Oh, Amara is doing fine," she said, her voice light and dismissive. "She works at the airport, you know. It keeps her busy." Works at the airport. She deliberately, skillfully diminished my role as the founder and chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar corporation into that of a wage worker, a ticket agent, a hobbyist. When I sent my father a formal, beautifully printed invitation to our company's 5th anniversary celebration, a black tie event with the governor and half the city's business leaders in attendance, he declined. The RSVP card just came back in the mail, the regretfully declines box checked. There was no note, no phone call, no explanation. This continued relentless rejection. It was not a single event, but 1,000 tiny paper-cut dismissals. And they hurt. They hurt deeply in a place that my professional success could not reach, could not heal. I kept trying. I do not know why. I think some part of me still believed naively that one more fact, one more data point would finally break through their narrative. I kept them on our company's newsletter mailing list. When we were featured on the cover of Business Aviation Monthly, a major industry magazine, I called my mother, my voice bright with a pride I could not hide. Her reaction was a bucket of ice water. "Well, Amara," she said, her tone skeptical, "you must be very good at exaggerating your role to those journalists. They are so easily impressed these days." When I shared the news of our expansion, our new office opening on the West Coast, I called my father, thinking the strategic growth would appeal to his business mind. He was silent for a long moment. "The West Coast," he said finally, his voice flat. "That seems overextended. Have you considered selling the company now that it has grown a little? Perhaps you could sell it to a real aviation business and get a stable job." A real business. The emotional impact of that, the constant invalidation, was significant. I had built a fortress of success, but I still felt the sting of their arrows. I was an imposter in my own life, or so their voices in my head told me. My professional accomplishment was constantly at war with my lingering, deep-seated childish feelings of inadequacy. I started working with a therapist, Dr. Alani. She was a brilliant, sharp black woman who understood without my having to explain it the complex weight of family legacy and expectation. I sat in her office surrounded by books and African art, and I unpacked it. I told her about the success. I told her about the awards, the revenue, the condo. And then I told her that none of it felt completely real because my parents still saw me as a failure. She listened patiently. She let me talk for weeks about it. Finally, during one particularly difficult session, she leaned forward. "Amara," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "they may never ever give you the validation you deserve. It is possible they are not capable of it. The question is, can you find peace with that possibility? Can you learn to fully inhabit your own achievements and celebrate your own success without their signature?" I was learning, slowly, painfully. I was learning that validation was a job I had to do for myself. I built a support network, a chosen family of close friends and mentors who saw me, who celebrated my successes without qualification, and who supported me through the struggles without judgment. They were the ones who came to my 5th anniversary party. They were the ones who toasted my success. And I was learning slowly that their genuine celebration meant more than the grudging, impossible-to-earn approval I had once craved. The aviation industry is a small, insular world. It is built on relationships and information, and that information travels fast. News travels quickly through the informal intelligence network of pilots, executives, and service providers. That was how I first learned about my parents' new client situation, even before I saw the paperwork. Global Innovations. A European technology conglomerate valued at over $50 billion had selected Sinclair and Associates. My parents' firm was going to handle their massive, complex expansion into the American market. The CEO of Global Innovations, A man named Lawrence Powell was a titan in the industry known for his demanding nature and his keen interest in private travel. The consulting contract I heard whispered was reportedly worth millions. It was by all accounts the largest, most significant client engagement in the history of my parents' company. 2 days later, that world collided with mine. My director of sales, Kenji, walked into my office, a thick proposal document in his hand. He had a strange, concerned expression on his face. "Amara," he said, placing the document on my desk. "We just received a formal request for proposal. It is from Sinclair and Associates." I looked down. There it was, the familiar embossed navy blue logo I had grown up with. It was an RFP sent from my father's company on behalf of their new client, Global Innovations. They were soliciting bids for a comprehensive executive travel solution. Kenji, who had been with me since the brutal early days, knew my entire history. He stood there shifting his weight. "Given your history with Sinclair," he asked tactfully, "and who they are, should we just pass on this one? We have plenty of other prospects in the pipeline." I stared at the logo. I considered the question. The professional detached response would be to recuse myself to avoid the conflict. The business opportunity was significant, but we were not desperate. We were thriving. We did not need this contract, but something deeper, something colder, motivated my decision. "No," I replied, finally my voice perfectly even. "This is an opportunity to demonstrate our service excellence on its own merits." I looked up at him. "Please prepare our standard proposal package. Put extra emphasis on our international capabilities and our concierge services. Treat it exactly as you would any other billion-dollar prospect." I held his gaze. "And Kenji, I do not want my connection to this firm mentioned to anyone on the proposal team. I want their work to be completely unbiased by any personal considerations." He nodded, understanding. "You got it, boss." That night I could not sleep. I was restless. I was digging through my old cloud storage files, looking for a template from my first job at the regional airline, searching for an old contract clause. I clicked on a folder labeled Old Career, and I found it. An email chain I had completely forgotten existed. It was dated 6 years ago. The email was from me to my mother, Genevieve Sinclair. The subject line was one word: promotion. I read my own words, and I could feel the ghost of the young woman who wrote them. She was so excited, so hopeful, so desperate for a crumb of validation. "Mom," it read, "I just wanted to share the good news. I got the promotion. I am an operations coordinator now. It is a huge step up. I am finally out of customer service and in the real nerve center." I scrolled down. I saw her reply. It had come 2 days later. 5 short, cold words that I had apparently buried deep in my memory. "That is nice, dear. When you are tired of that bus station, your desk here is still waiting." I closed the file. The old familiar ache, the sting of that casual, crushing dismissal was gone. In its place was a sudden, sharp, ice-cold clarity. Any lingering doubts, any shred of sentimentality, any hesitation I might have felt about the proposal, it all evaporated. My decision to pursue this contract was no longer just business. It was not about revenge. It was about the truth. It was about ending a story. 3 weeks later, we received the notification. Elite Aviation Solutions had been awarded the contract. The deciding factors cited in the formal acceptance letter were our proprietary transparent pricing model, our comprehensive concierge service package, and our portfolio of strong, verifiable customer testimonials. We had won. We had won it clean. There was no indication that anyone at Sinclair and Associates or at Global Innovations had made the connection between Amara Sinclair, CEO, and Amara Sinclair, the family disappointment. The first scheduled service under the new contract was set for the following week. It was a high-profile flagship flight transporting Lawrence Powell and his executive team to a critical meeting in Zurich, Switzerland. And according to the passenger manifest, they would be accompanied by their consultants. Elias and Genevieve Sinclair, my parents. I made the decision in that instant. My team was the best in the business. They could have handled it flawlessly without me. But this was not just another flight. This was not just a contract. I would personally oversee every single detail of this service. I would be there on site at the terminal when they arrived. I arrived at the terminal 3 hours before the scheduled departure. This was not just a flight. It was a performance, and I was the director, producer, and lead actor. I had selected my outfit with the precision of a general choosing armor. It was a bespoke charcoal gray suit, impeccably tailored. It was professional, authoritative, and utterly devoid of flash. It was the suit of a woman who did not need to be loud to be heard. I did a final personal walkthrough of the entire operation. I inspected our newest aircraft, the Gulfstream G650, from nose to tail. The cabin was immaculate. The specific rare Scottish single malt whiskey that Mr. Powell preferred was stocked and prominently displayed. The French press coffee machine he favored was ready. Every detail was perfect. I gathered my service team, the flight crew, and ground staff for a brief final meeting. This is not just another VIP flight. I told them, my voice low and intense. This is an opportunity to demonstrate in real time why Elite Aviation Solutions is the new standard. Let's show them what exceptional service truly means. I positioned myself near the main terminal entrance, standing in an alcove just out of the direct line of sight. I was outwardly calm, but my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I rehearsed my professional greeting, the words cool and measured in my mind. Then I saw it. The black executive Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The moment of truth had arrived. My father, Elias, emerged first. He looked exactly as he always had, the picture of corporate power in his signature navy blue suit and a gold tie pin. My mother, Genevieve, followed the pinnacle of understated elegance in a tailored cream-colored suit and her timeless pearls. Lawrence Powell, a tall man with silver hair and the palpable, commanding presence of a man used to running the world, stepped out last. My parents, in a practiced deferential dance, flanked him on either side. As they approached the glass doors, their voices carried on the quiet morning air. I heard my mother's laugh, that bright, brittle social laugh I had known my entire life. Powell must have asked her a question, perhaps about her family, about me. Her response was clear, sharp, and utterly unmistakable. "Our daughter," she said, the laugh still lingering in her tone. "Oh, honestly, Mr. Powell, she's the family disappointment." She said it with a casual, practiced air, as if discussing the weather. Walked away from the entire family legacy to work at an airport, if you can believe it. Such a terrible, terrible waste of potential. Disappointment. Wasted. The words did not just register, they hit me with the force of a physical blow. They sliced through 6 years of success, through the 8-figure revenue, through the steel and glass of the terminal I had built. In that single brutal second, the 29-year-old CEO vanished. I was gone. In my place stood the 8-year-old girl, pressing her face to a car window, mesmerized by a plane. I was the 18-year-old standing in a silent living room, staring at the torn, scattered pieces of my dream on the floor. I was the 22-year-old walking out of that steakhouse, utterly and completely alone, the door clicking shut behind me. The blood rushed to my ears, hot and loud. A surge of pure primal anger, an anger I had suppressed for a solid decade, rose in my chest like a fire. No, not today. I took one deep, deliberate breath. I physically pulled my shoulders back, straightening my spine until it was rigid. I felt the sharp, expensive fabric of my suit jacket. I felt the solid, cold, polished marble floor of my terminal beneath my heels. This was my ground. This was my house. They would not meet the little girl today. They would not meet the disappointment. They were about to meet the chief executive officer. I let the breath out slowly. I smoothed the cuffs of my shirt, and I stepped out from the alcove directly into their path. I walked straight to Lawrence Powell. I did not look at my parents. I did not acknowledge their presence. I extended my hand, my entire focus on him, projecting a calm I did not remotely feel. "Good morning, Mr. Powell," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Welcome to Elite Aviation Solutions. I am Amara Sinclair, founder and CEO. We are delighted to be handling your transportation today." The series of expressions that flashed across my parents' faces was a rapid-fire progression of pure, unfiltered emotion. It would have been comical under any other circumstance. First, simple, baffled confusion. Then, as my words registered as they really saw me in the suit in this place, came the utter profound shock. Then finally, a dawning, pale-faced horror. My mother's mouth opened slightly. At that exact critical moment, Catherine, my lead flight attendant, stepped forward, holding a silver tray with a single elegant crystal flute. "Champagne, Ms. Sinclair," she offered, addressing my mother. My mother's hand, the one that had been reaching for the glass, suddenly went slack. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, were locked on my face. The crystal flute slipped from her fingers. It did not just drop. It fell. It hit the marble floor and shattered with a single explosive crash that echoed with impossible volume in the sudden absolute silence of the terminal. Lawrence Powell, a man who had not gotten to his position by being slow, looked at me. He looked at my parents, who were frozen in a state of shock. He looked at the name on my business card, which I was still holding out. He saw the identical Sinclair name. He connected the dots instantly. He turned to my parents, his eyes sharp and analytical. "Sinclair, wait," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This is your daughter's company." My father, Elias, the most composed, unflappable man I had ever known, actually stammered. He visibly floundered his face, flushing a deep crimson. "Ah, yes. Well," he said desperately, trying to regain his footing, "Amara has been involved with this particular service provider for some time now." It was a pathetic last-ditch attempt to diminish me, to frame me as a mid-level employee. Powell ignored him. He dismissed my father as if he had not spoken and turned his full, undivided attention back to me. "Founder and CEO," he said. He shook my hand firmly. His voice held a new, distinct note of genuine respect. "Impressive. How long have you been operating?" I kept my professional smile in place. "We are celebrating our 6th year in business, sir." I replied, my voice as calm as if I were discussing the weather. "We currently operate a fleet of 12 aircraft across 6 cities in the United States." 12 aircraft. Powell repeated, his eyebrows raising slightly. He was clearly impressed. "That is substantial. And you built this from the ground up?" "I did, sir," I confirmed. "Now, would you like to see the aircraft before we depart? Our Gulfstream G650 is our newest addition to the fleet, and I think you will find the cabin configuration ideal for your work." He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "I would love that." He then turned just briefly to my parents, who were still standing frozen, a portrait of complete disbelief, the shattered glass glistening at their feet. "You must be incredibly proud," Powell said to them, a sharp, unreadable edge to his voice. "Building a successful aviation company in this competitive market is quite an achievement." My father cleared his throat, his composure slowly, painfully returning. "Yes, of course," he said stiffly. Amara has always been very determined." I gave them one brief, polite, unreadable smile. Then I turned my back to them and smoothly transitioned the group toward the tarmac, walking slightly ahead with Lawrence Powell, my client, leaving my parents, his consultants, to follow in our wake. Once we were airborne, the power shift was no longer symbolic. It was absolute. The seating arrangement in the Gulfstream's main cabin was a physical manifestation of it. Lawrence Powell and I sat in the plush, swiveling club seats directly across from each other. Our briefcases were open. We were discussing capital requirements, regulatory hurdles, and the financial models I had used to scale my fleet. My parents, his consultants, were seated together on the opposite side of the spacious cabin. They were, for all intents and purposes, passengers. For the first time in their lives, in the middle of a high-stakes business discussion, they were silent. They were bystanders. I could feel their attention, a palpable, heavy force in the quiet cabin. They were witnessing firsthand their disappointment, their glorified secretary discussing sophisticated strategy and capital acquisition with their most important multi-million-dollar client. Powell was sharp, and he was clearly impressed. "The service model you have created is exactly what our executive team needs," he commented as my lead flight attendant served his precisely prepared high-protein meal. The transparent pricing structure is a breath of fresh air. We are tired of being gouged by the other providers." My mother Genevieve finally could not stand the silence. She broke in, trying to control the narrative, her voice, that familiar bright false social chime. "We have always supported Amara's entrepreneurial spirit," she said, smiling broadly at Powell. "It was a revision of history, so audacious, so utterly shameless that I nearly choked on my water. My father, ever the strategist, saw his opening and quickly repositioned himself, not as a detractor, but as the origin of my success. Sinclair women have always been determined," he added, nodding sagely at Powell, as if this were all part of his master plan. "Her business skills, of course, come from watching me negotiate deals throughout her entire childhood." I did not confirm. I did not deny. I did not engage with their sudden, desperate revisions to our family narrative. I simply maintained my professional, polite smile, marveling at their shameless adaptation, and turned my attention back to my client. As we began our long, smooth descent into Zurich, Powell spoke, his voice crisp and decisive, and he spoke directly to me. "Ms. Sinclair, I would like to schedule a follow-up with my team next week. I want to discuss expanding our contract to cover all of Global Innovation's North American executive travel." He held my gaze. "And potentially explore options for our European operations as well. Your service model is exactly what we have been looking for." As we prepared for landing, I glanced over. I caught my mother staring at me. Her face was a complex, unreadable mask of confusion, shock, and perhaps for the first time in my entire adult life, genuine respect. The aircraft touched down smoothly. After Lawrence Powell shook my hand firmly, praised the service again, and departed in the waiting luxury sedan we had arranged. The private terminal felt suddenly cavernous and cold. It was just the three of us standing alone in the echoing silence. For perhaps the first time in my life, my parents Elias and Genevieve Sinclair seemed to be completely at a loss for words. My mother spoke first, her voice lacking its usual sharp, authoritative tone. It was thin, uncertain. "Amara," she began, why did you not tell us about the scope of your company? We had no idea." There it was, after all these years. I did not feel the hot rush of anger. I did not feel the need to shout. I just felt the cold, hard weight of the simple truth. "I tried, Mom," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Many times. I invited you to our company events, including our 5-year anniversary. I sent you our newsletters. I sent you the magazine feature. I called to share our milestones. Both of you made it abundantly clear you were not interested." My father, visibly uncomfortable with this emotional terrain, immediately tried to pivot back to what he knew business. "Well," he said, clearing his throat and straightening his expensive tie, "now that we see the scale of your operation, perhaps we can help. We can connect you with more clients from our network. Several of our associates could certainly benefit from your services." The offer, the sudden, opportunistic self-interest, was so transparent that I almost laughed. "I appreciate the offer, Dad," I replied evenly, my voice remaining professional. "But our client acquisition strategy is quite effective as it stands. We actually have a waiting list for our membership program and are becoming more selective about the clients we accept." My mother's expression shifted, a flash of that old manipulative calculation I knew so well. She tried one last time to rewrite the past. "We have always supported you, Amara," she insisted, her voice attempting its old strength, "even when we did not understand your choices." "That is not how I remember it," I said calmly, but with a new hard edge to my voice that stopped her cold. "That is not how I remember this morning. You called me a disappointment less than 2 hours ago, Mother. You said I was a waste of potential. You said it directly to your client's face." The truth, bald and ugly, hung in the sterile air between us. My father tried to intervene to smooth it over. "In the heat of the moment, Amara, things are sometimes said that they were meant—" I countered, my voice sharp, cutting him off. "They have been meant for 10 years. You have both made your disapproval abundantly clear at every single opportunity. You told our extended family I was struggling financially. You declined my invitations to company milestones. You deliberately and publicly minimized my role when speaking to others. The years of accumulated hurt, the thousands of paper cuts, they did not surface as an emotional outburst. They surfaced as a calm, cold recitation of facts they could not deny. "I built this company," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "Without your support, without your connections, and without your approval. I want to be clear. I would have welcomed your encouragement, but I did not need it to succeed. Moving forward, I am open to building a new, more respectful relationship. But I will not participate in pretending the past did not happen. I will not." My mother's eyes glistened. For a second I thought she might cry, but her fortress of pride held. My father, he just looked old. Suddenly the confident, intimidating titan of my childhood looked diminished and tired. We should discuss this further," he suggested, his voice low, "when we return to Boston." "I will consider it," I replied. It was not an acceptance. It was a consideration. "For now," I said, glancing at my watch, all business once again. "I have to get back to my team. We have another client flight departing for London in 3 hours." I gave them a single crisp professional nod, and I walked away. I did not wait for a response. I did not seek a final resolution. I left them standing there together in the middle of my terminal. For the first time in our entire relationship, I was the one setting the terms. I was the one walking away. The business ramifications of that encounter in Zurich were not just substantial. They were immediate and seismic. Before our wheels had even cooled from the return flight, Lawrence Powell's office was on the phone. Within a week, exactly as he had promised, he signed the expanded contract. He tripled the scope of the original agreement, officially making Elite Aviation Solutions the exclusive carrier for all of Global Innovation's North American executive travel. But he did not stop there. Powell, a man who staked his reputation on efficiency and excellence, became our most vocal advocate. He began actively referring us, making personal introductions to other C-suite executives in his network. The result was staggering. We signed 5 new major corporate clients within a single month. Our growth trajectory, which had been steep and steady, suddenly went vertical. The irony, the part that still makes me pause, is that it benefited my parents' business as well. Their association with us, their new exclusive cutting-edge aviation provider, suddenly enhanced their own image with clients. They were no longer just management consultants. They were comprehensive business solution providers who had a special relationship with the hottest, most innovative name in private aviation. They were connected. Their biggest failure had inadvertently become their newest asset. In these overlapping business matters, we maintained a strictly professional, almost sterile relationship. All communication was handled through appropriate channels. My director of sales spoke to their director of logistics. My assistant spoke to their assistant. There were no personal calls. There was no family discussion. It was just business. Fueled by this massive new influx of capital and clients, Elite Aviation accelerated at a speed that both terrified and thrilled me. We added 4 new aircraft to our fleet within the next year. We expanded our staff to over 70 full-time employees. We opened 2 additional international service offices. And in the most symbolic move of all, we purchased our new headquarters. It was not a leased office in a shared terminal. It was our own standalone building, a sleek modern structure of glass and steel right at the edge of the airfield. We put our company name on the facade in large brushed metal letters illuminated at night. It was the first thing you saw when you drove into the private aviation wing. It was visible from the air, a bright, clear beacon for aircraft taking off and landing at the airport. But the professional victory was only half the story. Personally, that confrontation in the Zurich terminal triggered a complex, messy, and profound emotional process. In the weeks that followed, I was not just celebratory, I was a wreck. I felt a surge of pure, uncut vindication, a fierce, primal pride that I had been right all along. But that feeling was immediately followed by surprising, gut-wrenching waves of grief. I was grieving. I was mourning the parental relationship I had desperately wanted, the one I had chased for 2 decades, and the one I now knew with absolute certainty I had never really had. I brought all of it, the triumph and the tears, into Dr. Alani's office. She helped me hold both. She helped me understand that the victory and the grief were not contradictory. They were two sides of the same coin. "You are processing the death of a hope, Amara," she told me, her voice kind but firm. "That is a real death, and it requires real mourning. Healing is not a single event. It is not a victory parade. It is a process." I shared the full story, every last detail, with only my closest friends, my chosen family, the small group of people who had been in the trenches with me, who had seen the struggle, the debt, and the doubt. Their celebration, their pure, unqualified joy for me, meant more to me in that moment than any belated, complicated approval from my parents ever could. We were at my new condo drinking champagne, the real expensive kind I could now afford. My best friend Stephanie, who had been there since the beginning, since the flimsy business plan and the couch sleeping days, raised her glass. She looked at me, her eyes shining. "You know," she said, "the amazing part isn't that you proved them wrong, Amara." She paused, searching for the words. "It is that you proved you right." That stuck with me. She was right. The victory, when it finally settled in my bones, was not loud. It was not explosive. It was quiet. It was the profound, deep, cellular quiet of a war, a long, exhausting internal war, finally being over. The 100-pound burden I had carried on my back my entire life, the crushing, desperate need to win their approval, it just dissolved. It was lifted. It was gone. And for the first time, standing in my own home, looking out at the open water, I felt light. The dynamics with my family entered a new, strange and quiet phase after that day in Zurich. 3 weeks after we all returned to Boston, my mother called. She invited me to dinner at their home. It was the first time they had done so in nearly 5 years. The evening was profoundly awkward. It was a tense navigation of unspoken truths, the air thick with everything that had been said and everything that had been left unsaid for a decade. Old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, the ghosts of old arguments lurking in every pause. But it was a first step, a tentative, fragile movement toward a different kind of relationship. The changes in them were subtle but undeniable. My mother Genevieve, ever conscious of image and reputation, began mentioning my company to her friends. I heard it from my cousin. My mother was suddenly publicly proud of her entrepreneurial daughter. She spoke of elite aviation solutions as if she had been its champion all along. My father Elias showed his recalibration in a different way. It was more subtle. He began for the first time in my entire life asking me business questions. He would ask about my fleet acquisition strategy, my opinions on fuel, hedging my approach to international regulatory compliance. He was not testing me. He was not quizzing me as he had in childhood. He was asking for my opinion. That first time he asked for my professional take on a market matter, the simple, quiet acknowledgement of my expertise felt more significant than the question itself. He was finally treating me as a peer. I was not naive. I knew with the cold clarity I had earned that these changes were at least partly motivated by self-interest and by their desperate need to save face. They had been publicly wrong in front of their most important client. They were absorbing my success into their own narrative to protect their legacy. But I also recognized that it reflected a genuine recalibration of how they viewed me. I was no longer an abstract disappointment. I was a tangible, undeniable, 8-figure success. Our relationship remained imperfect, and I accepted that it likely always would be. There was too much history, too many deep wounds on both sides to ever fully heal. But we found a new equilibrium. It was not the warm, unconditionally supportive family bond that some people enjoy. It was something else. It was a measured, cautious, and finally mutual respect. But the most profound impacts of this entire journey, the deepest lessons, were internal. In the quiet moments of reflection, in the hours spent with Dr. Alani, I came to understand a difficult truth. The very rejection that had once caused me so much excruciating pain had actually been the instrumental, critical tool in forging my independence and my resilience. I realized that if my parents had supported my initial aviation interest, if they had paid for that embry-riddle education and used their connections to get me a job, I might have built an entirely different life. It would have been a life I suspect lived in their shadow. A life far more dependent on their approval, their connections, and their validation. The difficult path, the lonely path, the one they had forced me onto, had compelled me to develop strengths I would otherwise never have discovered. It forced me to build my own network, to find my own mentors, and to define my own values in direct opposition to the ones I was raised with. I also, to my own surprise, developed a quiet compassion for them. I began to see that their rigid, suffocating expectations came from their own limited understanding of success and happiness. Their inability to see beyond their predetermined vision for me, their fear, it reflected their own insecurities as much as any deliberate cruelty. This understanding did not excuse their behavior. It did not erase the pain. But it helped me finally to release the white-knuckled anger that had defined our relationship for so long. My work continued. The scholarship program I had founded expanded. We were now supporting 10 students annually with both full funding and, more importantly, the one-on-one mentorship I had craved. I spoke often at universities not about balance sheets, but about authentic leadership and the courage to follow a genuine passion. After one of those presentations, a young woman, a brilliant engineering student, approached me. She was hesitant. She told me my story, which she had read about, had given her the courage to pursue her own aerospace dreams despite intense family pressure to choose a more suitable medical career. In that moment, I recognized that my personal private struggle now had value far beyond my own journey. The journey continues to evolve every single day, both professionally and personally. If you have ever felt underestimated, if you have ever been dismissed by the very people who should have supported you, remember this. Other people's limitations, their fears, their narrow definitions of success, they do not need to become your own. The path to proving your worth lies not in a desperate lifelong chase for their approval. It lies in building something brick by brick that aligns with your own values and your own vision. Have you ever had to prove someone wrong about you? How did it feel when you finally succeeded on your own terms? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if you understood that feeling in the pit of your stomach, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and vindication. Thank you for joining me today. And always remember, sometimes the people who doubt you the most, the ones who break your heart, end up creating your greatest motivation to succeed. The world will often try to hand you a script, a predetermined legacy that feels more like a cage. For many Black women, this script is written in the ink of respectability and obligation. They told me my dream was a phase and my passion was waste. I learned that true liberation isn't about rewriting their script. It's about throwing it away and writing your own. Success isn't about getting their approval. It's about realizing you never needed it. Your peace, your vision, your empire, that is built by you for you.